Hello Year 7. So today I just want to talk through a little bit of details for your end of year exam drawing. As you probably already know, this is the image you're going to be drawing. We've been practicing licorice all sorts for a while, both classes in different ways. So today your test is just going to be how you manage particular elements of this drawing. We've learnt a lot over the last year about drawing 3D shapes, tonal range, shading techniques and colour. So all of this is coming into this final drawing. Okay, and also with gridding as well. We've done a lot of gridding before, so we're going to try that out. So the first thing you're going to do, you've got an option of a couple of images. So you will choose an image in your next lesson or in your first lesson before your last lesson before your exam. And you're going to have to grid this to fit onto this piece of paper. Now, a lot of people have asked me, do they have to make it larger or do they do it size for size? You're absolutely fine to do it size for size, but ultimately the choice is yours. We are not going to dictate the size of your grid. You can choose the size of your grid. You have done gridding before, so you should know how to draw a grid now. My only tips are that you remember to start from the same side. So if I start from this side measuring, I need to start from this side. Do not start measuring from the other side backwards. Do not flip your drawing round because you will make a mistake. And also make sure you measure both sides. Don't just do one side and then try your best to match it up. You will get wonky lines. Do is translate that onto this piece of paper. Now the first thing I would do is measure the whole outline of your image, which this is about 15 by 13, and I would draw that onto here. So 15, some people like to start from the very edge, some people like to do it in the middle, it's completely up to you. Very hard. And now I'm going to draw the exact same grid, whatever grid size you've chosen, onto this piece of paper. Exactly the same, top and bottom. Okay, so I have my grid boxes. Now, so there's a few people, some things people like to do to help them if you get a little bit confused. There's two options. The first thing people quite like to do is number their rows and their columns and do the same on the corresponding one. This kind of helps you not lose count. Some people like to do ABC as well for the different side. Go all the way around if you wanted to, but that usually helps people not lose track of where they're drawing. The other thing you can do is make yourself a viewfinder. Now to make a viewfinder, you just get a scrap piece of paper, we've got some if you want to ask for it, and you draw a box using a ruler that's exact same size as your grid box, exactly the same size, and you cut that out, and that gives you a little viewfinder. That's very useful for when you start colouring and shading, because it allows you to focus in on a particular box and see what's happening in that individual box. It's quite a useful thing to have if you need to add some detail. Okay, you can make one, but it's not essential if you don't want it. So now I have my grid boxes. The next thing I need to do is start sketching out my basic shapes. Now we know how to draw basic shapes. We know how to do cubes and cylinders. We've practiced that before, but we obviously have to follow a grid as well to make sure it's an accurate place. Now, people again do this differently. Some people will work their way across looking at box 1 first and saying there's nothing in there. Box 2, nothing in there. Box 3, nothing. 4, I mean, there's a little bit of shadow in that one if you want to sketch out with that shadow. 5, shadow very lightly carries on around. Box 6, shadow starts coming up. And in box 6, I start getting my first shape. So it starts on that very corner there, curves around, because we know it's a cylinder, so we know it's naturally going to curve around and starts bending up. Now, as my classes know from some of the clay work we've been doing, licorice all sorts are not perfectly accurate shapes. They're all a little bit squashed. I'm sure if you've ever seen a licorice all sort before, you know they're not always perfect cylinders and perfect shapes. Curves around just here. Think about how much, again, you could use your viewfinder. Think about how much of that licorice all sort is in that box. Not very much at all. How Where does it come in? Where does it go out of the grid box? About 3/4 of the way up it comes out there. About 1/3 of the way in it comes down there. That's where you're going to get your accuracy from. It's also really useful to look at negative space, that little tiny triangle there that's left over in the background. Where the shadows are, if you want to. Okay, so that's our basic drawing. Again, you can see I've drawn quite lightly. The next thing I would personally do before I start doing much colour shading is I would just start taking away some of these grid lines, particularly in the lightest areas, so the white on top of there. Now you've got it marked out, you shouldn't really... Okay, so for the next part of your exam, we're obviously going to have to start doing our coloured pencil shading. Now it's our hope that your exam phase is mostly centred around the shading. We will show you when we talk about our marking of this work, the part of the marking is going to be about your pace and the quality of your work. If you only get to this outline by the end of the exam, we obviously don't have a lot to mark in terms of your use of colour, so you need to try and work on your pace a little bit. Now, if you've got your own coloured pencils, and we do recommend having your own coloured pencils, please do bring them in. You can get some from the supermarket for a couple of pounds, £2.50. Please endeavour to get some over the half term. Do come and talk to us if you don't have any or can't get hold of any, so that we can help you before the exam. We will not be in the exam, and as far as I'm aware, most of the year group will be doing the exam at the same time. We do not have enough pencils to do that for everyone. So I'm just jumping straight in. Now you've all been learning how to mix your colours, how to add your details. Again, there's no rhyme and reason to why I've started with this yellow one. It's very peculiar, I know. Some of you will start very methodically in the corner. I don't know why I do this. So I'm starting with a very light base coat of yellow. Very light to start with, and you can see I'm shading nice and smooth. Nice and smooth, and getting a really loose base coat. Now that yellow is not necessarily the yellow that's in that picture. When I have a look at the edges, I can see bits of orange in there, so I'm going to crack out my orange. And at the bottom, I can almost see like a brown, darky shade. You could also mix a little bit of purple, because hopefully we remember from our colour theory that a little bit of purple mixed in with our yellow gives us brown shades, because they're opposite colours. These are all things we need to understand when we're shading and making shadows. Mixing an opposite colour with your main colour helps with a lot of shadow. Now, the reason I think I've gravitated towards this yellow licorice also is because there's quite a lot of texture in it. And as I said, even though the assumption is potentially that it's all nice and yellow, there's a lot of orange mixed in here. So I'm adding my orange on. We want to have a little think about shading techniques while we're adding our colours. I'm actually using a little bit of scumbling right now. Very gently and very lightly and subtly, but to me I can see a bit of texture. I can see some areas where it's cracked. Just around these edges here. I'm going to mix a little bit of that orange in down here where it gets a little bit more on the edge. And then I'm going to start mixing my brown and my purple into this bottom corner. We want to avoid black. Okay, apart from with the licorice, actually also for your shadows, don't just always go to black. Think about how you can make these shadows with colours. Okay, again, I'm just using a purple colour now. And my purple, blending over my yellow, you can probably already see, gives you a little bit more of a brown shade. It's looking a little bit too warm for the colour I want. So if it's too warm, then I need to add maybe a colder colour. I'm sure you're all thinking about what colder colours I could add right now. So mixing my purple slowly. I'm very, very slowly building up my dark tones. I don't just suddenly go in pressing really hard, even though it is quite dark down there. So I'm going to get my darker blue pencil and mix in a little bit of my darker blue to develop in that shadow. And that is probably a tone I'm a lot happier with. Lots of colour mixing. Lots of texture. Mixing in my purple with my blue to get my darkest tones. There we go. If you can hear that scratching sound, it's my cat scratching at the window, meowing at the window. Be quiet. Okay, a bit more of my yellow just over the top of those shadows. And that is starting to be a colour I'm a little bit happy with. I need to build that up a little bit more. And I'm going to do it very, very slowly. Lots of colours over time. But I just want to give you a quick example of how to do that. So a mixture of purple and blue and yellow, actually, if you look at that quite closely, you're probably seeing quite a lot of almost greenish tones in there. I'll hold it a bit closer, which is actually really interesting because that's not the colour I've used. Now, with my licorice, obviously you can use black, and I probably will gently use some black in here, but I'm still not adverse to mixing a few bits of colour with that. Black is so flattening and it's very heavy. It distracts from a lot of the beautiful colours we're using. So I'm actually going to mix a bit of my purple in to my black. Not loads of it because it is still black, but a bit of purple, a bit of blue, something like that, just balanced in with it. Personally, I think it just makes it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more interesting, and it helps you blend as well around those edges. There we go, so mixing my purple in with my black just softens it up a little bit. And I'd probably do the same with the shadows as well a bit later. A bit more of my yellow, going to press a bit harder in places at the end to get some more vibrant yellow. And that is quite a nice yellow tone there. Okay, so I'm not going to show you, oh, lost my torch. I'm not going to show you all of the different drawings because obviously you're going to work out some by yourself. I will talk you through the bobbly one because that is certainly going to be a tricky one. First thing I'd recommend is considering your shading technique with this one, and you really have to look at that image for all of the different tones. There are some gaps in between your bobbly one that probably needs maybe a brown or maybe a dark green, these kind of colours. And there's a few ways you can do this. First of all, you could, if you wanted to, actively draw lots of circles. They're not tiny, tiny. So you could draw a few circles and you could leave a few a little bit lighter and build them up over some time, pressing a little bit harder with some and a little bit lighter with others to get that texture. You could also do a bit of scumbling. So remember when we did lots of little swirls for our scumbling to create our texture? You might want to do that, and then you might want to again build up over the top with a few darker ones. Just be careful you don't shade too regularly. You don't want to space them out so like a pattern, and make sure you kind of show that some of them overlap. Might want to build up just a couple of semicircles. There are some just plain white ones, so you might want to be careful about leaving a few a little bit lighter and building up that texture. Now as you get to the darker section, you might want to create yourself a little bit of base colour to start with. So I'm pressing a little bit harder again, scumbling, because I'm trying to keep that circular technique. And then I might go in with a darker red, darker blue, and start adding a few more details there, because it is quite dark in that bottom section. And it kind of, just as it comes around the corner, it maybe starts to get a little bit lighter. So you're going to want to show that. And as it starts coming over the edge, I'm probably just going to do a few little half circles to kind of blend it round. And then I'm going to again start with my scumbling, maybe widen up, larger circles, larger scumbling, so that it slowly builds its way around that corner. There's no real set heavy edge where it suddenly changes from dark to light because it's got a curved edge. Now we did talk about how we have some of these gaps. I've got kind of a brown colour or a green colour. You might just want to pick out a few of these little gaps where the bubbles have fallen off. It's up to you what colour you do that, but that would be interesting. That would be very good attention to detail if you can find that. I've got a lighter brown here, which might actually be better. Probably should use the lighter brown, but I might just pick out and choose a few places where those bubbles have fallen off. Okay, and again, I'm going to do super quick just to show you a little bit of texture. I want you to take your time with it a little bit more. And again, a little bit of combination of my dark blue in places, just to add some definition to some of the curves and the edges. And that's how we're going to make it look a bit more 3D. Okay, now when we do our background, you can obviously start shading in your background. You're going to use probably combinations of dark blue and light blue for this. Certainly you're going to want a little bit more dark blue for the shadows. I always shade in shadows in a horizontal line as opposed to a curved line because it shows it's a flat surface. And remember, we're going to be very dark close to the object, around that corner and around that corner, very dark. And then I do my horizontal shading. It's a flat surface as opposed to when we do our curved shading, when we do 3D objects like I did with that bit there. I generally do mostly nice smooth horizontal lines. And we talked about not wanting there to be a solid edge to your shadows earlier on. So make sure you don't do a really heavy outline. It should just kind of fade away. There should be an area, I mean I can see a relatively solid space where that shadow is, but we don't want to have a darker outline around the shadow. I'm just mixing in some light blue with my dark blue, and you can see where it gets lighter again. And we should be able to see that difference in the definition. Mixing your colours, blending and smoothing. Remember our shading techniques: hatching, cross hatching, blending, scumbling, as well as your mixing of colours. We should be able to see all of that in this drawing. Okay, that was a very small section. Obviously you want to think about things like your colours. So if you've got like your orange section, we did talk about when we're painting our clay sculptures that it's quite a yellowy orange, didn't we? If you were in my class and we were talking about our clay sculptures, it might be that this orange isn't quite yellowy enough and I might need to mix a little bit of yellow in with my orange. I might need to make a bit more of an amber colour because we know what amber is. Not a lot of calls for my favourite chartreuse in here, unfortunately. Very sad about that. And it's quite a bit darker down there. So mix your colours. Listen to the tips about potentially mixing some shades with your black. Lost my black pencil. It's gone. There it is. My licorice section here. Maybe I want to mix some purple with it. You don't have to, but I prefer it. Bit purple in with my licorice. And don't forget your shadows. Again, I'm going to use a bit of purple with my shadows and opposite colours. So a bit purple and a bit blue. Purples and blues are working quite well for our shadows. Dark blues, dark purples, not black. Okay, mixing them together. So, good luck. We're excited to see what you produce. Just make sure it's all nice and good quality. And good luck for your exam.